what matters the most. Those of you who are used to seeing this in streaming form and not in interactive form from at home or wherever you are and are picking it up off the stream, the only thing I've been asked to advise you is to just hang on. It could be a little bit of a bumpy ride with everything else going on. Otherwise, we will make sure we have a clean copy of this up after we are finished on the Temple Solel webpage. Otherwise, I'm going to say thank you to all of you who are here in the room. Thank you particularly to our tech crew, to Michael, to Phil, Leon, who's here in both a participatory and a tech capacity out of curiosity to see how all of this works. We've actually got real people in the room. We've got real people at home. Chag Sameach. It is Erev Purim. Yeah. And if you can hear each other, that is even better. Right now, we've got everybody at home muted just so that the background noise doesn't get in the way. If you're in a quiet place, feel free to unmute those microphones and we can truly pretend to all be in the same room. And as you're doing that, let me explain to everybody at home that what you can't see terribly clearly on the screens behind me in the long view that we're used to on Friday night is actually what I'm seeing on my screen up here. And that is quite simply all of you at home on the Teams meeting. So right now, if you have your camera on or if you are in the room, I see you equally. And if you are at home with your camera on and your microphone open, I see you and hear you equally as I do the people in the room, which to me is a really cool advancement in what we are doing. So having explained the technology to the best of my limited ability, let me plunge into something else where my ability is somewhat limited, and that is trying to explain what the heck the book of Esther is about, which is why we're here tonight. So tonight is going to be this amalgam, this mix, sort of like the presentation is as well. We're going to be doing a little bit of reading from the Megillah, and if you can see Gorilla next to me holding the Megillah as always. We'll do a little bit of Hebrew, we'll do a lot of English, and I have prepared a lot of materials for us to look at some of the more intriguing, if frequently overlooked because we don't necessarily realize there's an issue in what we're reading. Most of the commentary for tonight is taken specifically from one collection of rabbinic midrash, and that is the collection known as Esther Rabbah, the great midrashic series, this one on the book of Esther, obviously. And what we're going to find, I think, is that in much the same way that our knowledge of Torah characters and other biblical characters has been significantly filled in by the midrash over the years, so too, without our knowing it, are the characters in this story of the book of Esther. And we're going to see where some of this comes from tonight and start to get a handle on just who these five major characters are. Those five being King Ahasuerus, Esther, Vashti, Mordechai, and this is a test of the emergency Haman system. Ooh. Right, right. You may not have groggers in your hands at home or in the room, but when I say Haman, ooh, exactly, I want to hear noise because that's one of the things we're obligated to do on this night is to blot out Haman completely. Ooh. Good, you're paying attention. So in order to read from the Megillah on Purim, we are told that one is expected to recite not one, but two blessings. The first one specific to Purim and the reading of the Megillah, which we are told is a commandment, which is a really interesting thing to try and figure out in the rabbi's own tradition, where the rabbis need to be able to find a Torah-itic verse to hang the commandment upon. This one they look very cleverly to and find, these are your set times that you shall celebrate. And then they leave it open for exactly what they are, and therefore they can include Purim as one of them because they've decreed Purim as one. So because we're reading a book that wasn't around when the Torah was codified, it was probably written later, or at least contemporaneously and not included for the canon. But the rabbis, when they need a bracha, they say a bracha. And in this case, they want us to think that reading the The Megillah on Purim is commanded. So we say, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, likroa et ha-Megillah, to read the Megillah. The second blessing that we are taught to say on this occasion will sound very familiar. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asa nisim lavotenu, bayamim ha'im bazman hazeh. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of all time and space. That's really interesting what's happening behind me right now. Who made miracles for our ancestors at this time of year in ancient days. And if it sounds familiar, it's because it's the second blessing for Hanukkah and the menorah as well. And one of the questions you probably want to ask yourself if you haven't done it before is, why would we say a blessing that we say on Hanukkah also on Purim at rabbinic invitation? And because we're having fun with all of this technology and much of it is new, I'm going to stretch and make this the first night of Hanukkah for real, even though Purim is only a one-night affair. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechianu v'kimanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Amen. So real simple. I'm going to start reading a little bit. If you got a question and you're in the room, physically a hand up. If you're at home and you got a question, you can either put your hand up and hope that I see you and I'm looking in the right direction, or there is a hand that you can raise electronically on your picture on the toolbar that should be at the bottom of your screen. And those I will eventually see once you click them on. But here we go. Vayhi bimei Achashverosh. Hu Achashverosh hamolech mehodu ad Kush sheva v'esrim umea medina. And it happened in the days of Achashverosh. The Achashverosh who was king from India to Kush, 127 provinces. And so it begins. Esther chapter 1, verse 1. Any questions on the first verse? Bob Michelson.
I don't know that I ever focused on the length of his 127 provinces.
Do me a favor, come grab the microphone. And you guys will keep that down here so everybody at home can hear us too.
And then we'll pass it around.
Exactly. I've got it turned on right now. Just flick the button when you're done and when you're
So I never focused on how big his reign was.
Uh-huh.
And does it really say India?
It does. Mehodu ad Kush.
And the other place, where in the world is that?
Okay, so Hodu is just one of those fun place names in Hebrew. It's the name given to modern-day India. But if you think about where else we hear the word Hodu, we hear it in several of the Psalms, as in Hodu ladonai ki tov. Oh, give thanks to God, for God is good. It's also the word for Turkey. So in Hebrew, modern Hebrew, one word combines thanks, Turkey, and India.
That's worse than shalom.
That works really well in November in America. But considering the Israelis don't generally celebrate American Thanksgiving unless there are expat Americans in their group, it's kind of an interesting troika of meanings for the word Hodu. Cush, we know from the book of Numbers, when Miriam and Aaron complain that Moses is doing some things that they don't like, and what becomes the identified patient is that he's married a Cushite woman. And the explanation that's given is Ethiopian. Because he was in Torah study when we studied that, and he remembered it. So from Hodu to Cush would be from, I'm going to call it west-northwest dramatically, to east-southeast, not so dramatically, of Israel. Or basically pretty much all of Asia that was known to the Western world in ancient times, to pretty close to the edge of where you could go on the land bridge from Europe or Asia down into Africa without hitting the desert. And that would have been down the Nile or up the Nile, because that's the upper Nile, into the Sudan and over to Ethiopia. So what they're saying is pretty much the entire region we're familiar with in those 127. Alter, whose translation I'm reading here, has an interesting note on 127. This is the first in a series of flamboyant numerical exaggerations in the story, which he's setting up as an excuse for what comes at the end. The part that we never read when we're with our kids because it's not G-rated. The part that happens after Haman is taken care of and we should be safe, and we go on a vengeance spree anyway. So Alter is setting up this idea of fantastic, flamboyant numerical extravagance as a way of getting out of the fact that the text says that we killed 75,000 people at the end. So just so you know where that concept comes, well, that and the fact that the party that's about to be held lasts for 180 days. And as if that wasn't absurdly long enough, as soon as it's over, he throws another party for another 7. Because apparently 6 months of straight partying isn't enough. You need 7 more days. I don't know why. Any other questions about verse 1? That wasn't the one I was expecting. Anybody at home got a question? Because if you don't, I've got one from the Midrash. And it's from the very first words. Vayhi bimei Achashverosh. According to the introduction to Esther Rabbah, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman interpreted in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, every place that Vayhi bimei is stated in Tanakh, it indicates nothing but trouble. Now, that's a nice statement to make, especially without footnotes. So fortunately, I have a couple of footnotes. Not only is Vayhi bimei used here, it's used in Genesis 14. Genesis 14, I hear you asking. Isn't that the story of the war between the 5 outside kings and the 4 internal princes within the land, where Lot gets taken prisoner? Why, yes. Yes, it is. And Abraham has to go rescue Lot at the end. Well, interestingly enough, the story starts out, Vayhi bimei Amraphel melech Shinar. Vayhi bimei, when King Amraphel of Shinar, King Arioch of Elasar, King Chedorlaomer of Elam, and King Tidal of Goyim made war on King Bera of Sodom, King Bersha of Gomorrah, King Shinab of Admah, King Shember of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. So clearly, bad things happened after that introduction. But there's an even more intriguing one. The book of Ruth, one of the other Megillot, starts, yeah, by the way, those of you who are in the room, if you want to take a copy of Tanakh and follow these, I got plenty up here. Vayhi bimei shofet hamishpatim, vayhi ra'av ba'aretz. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a man of Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and 2 sons went to reside in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, and his 2 sons were Machlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Benjamin and Judah. They came to the country of Moab and remained there. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons, who married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. Then those 2, Machlon and Chilion, also died. So the woman was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. I would say that qualifies in the rabbinic mindset as nothing but trouble. So here are the rabbis looking at really common words and looking at a combination of words that we're not used to seeing together in too many places and finding significant meaning. Every place you see that phrase, Vayhi bimei, look out. You want to curse something before it starts and you're writing about it as it's beginning, start your journal entry with Vayhi bimei, and bad things will follow. That's clear from the rabbis. In those days when Ahasuerus was seated on his royal throne, which was in Shushan, the capital, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a great banquet in the presence for all his ministers and his servants, the freeholders of Persia and Media, the noblemen and the ministers of the provinces, when he showed the wealth of his kingdom's glory and the worth of the splendor of his greatness many days, 180 to be exact. And when these days had gone by, the king made a banquet for all the people who were in Shushan, the capital, from the greatest to the least, a 7-day banquet in the garden court of the king's pavilion. White linen, indigo cotton, fastened with cords of fine crimson cloth on silver cylinders and marble columns, gold and silver couches on a paving of alabaster and marble and mother of pearl and black pearl. And drink was proffered in golden vessels and vessels of various kinds, and abundant royal wine in kingly fashion. And the drinking was according to royal rule. There was no compulsion, for thus had the king decreed to all the officials in his house, to let every man act according to his will. It's not just a party, it's a raver, as it turns out. And it's not just the numbers that are exaggerated, it's the description. Bob, you're in the room, so and Sharon, you too, I'll describe it this way. It's like playing a round of golf at the club on Monday after they've held the club championship on Saturday and Sunday. The course is still set up for the championship. You get to enjoy it in its hardest form, its most intriguing form. And I think that's what the 7 days was. The idea that it was an opportunity for the simple people, the citizens of Shushan, to see what had been going on inside the walls for 180 days before they finished cleaning up, which is why all the good stuff was still out. Probably not in the best of condition, but it was still out. So the question we didn't ask in verse 1, who exactly is this Ahasuerus? Where do we know the name from? Well, here's where we don't know the name from. Any place in Persian history. It's not closely enough connected linguistically to any of the names of the Persian kings we know. The scholars want us to believe that it was Xerxes. Personally, Artaxerxes sounds a lot closer to Ahasuerus to me than Xerxes does. But we don't really know for sure, and that may be deliberate. But that doesn't stop the rabbis who are asking the same question we are. The rabbis say he was called Ahasuerus, since anyone who remembers him, his head hurts. Choshech et rosho in Hebrew, which sort of, if you say it sideways with a little bit of wine on Purim, Choshech et rosho sounds a little bit like Ahasuerus. Yeah, the note in that one wants us to think it's Artaxerxes. Most of the scholars think it's Xerxes just on the timing of things. Yeah, I'm not sure in the long run it matters because I'm pretty sure this is not meant to be taken as history. It sounds like a name that might have been a Persian king during the time when we were under Persian control. So, what else do we know about this Ahasuerus? Think about the story.
Only that that was his 3rd year of his reign. And then he spent 6 months of
So far,
that
he's in the
for his
3rd year of
party.
his reign, and he spent at least 6 months of it partying.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's pretty incredible for that time of the year.
So obviously, they're not out fighting a lot of wars at this moment. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have the freedom to be partying like this in that way. But what else do we know from having read the story in past years? How would you describe Ahasuerus as a character? And feel free, if you're at home, to jump in and answer as well. That's part of the idea of being interactive at home.
I was going to say he likes to party.
Right.
He likes his horde of women. Trying to be nice there. His harem, that's it.
Aaron Engel, you want to bail him out?
Well, one thing that stands out is he isn't taking care of business at all. How's the the country supplying all those wares that he needs to handle his parties.
He's definitely well served by his staff. And his staff includes not just the wait staff, as we're going to see, but a large number of advisors who seem to have, some of them more than others, rather heavy sway over the decision-making that goes out under the king's name. And that's a consistent factor throughout the story. So it starts here in chapter 1. If you look at verse 10, I believe it is, on the seventh day when the king was of good cheer through the wine, he said to Mehuman and Bezetta, Chashbona, Begeta, Agaptha, Zetan, and Carcass, and I'm not surprised after partying for 6 months that one of his advisors was named Carcass. Clearly he was the lightweight drinker in the crowd, who are then described as the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, who were asked to bring Queen Vashti. So they're servants. They've been neutered so that they're not a threat to the king. But they're mentioned by name, and there are 7 of them, and they have an important role. And then a little bit later, when Vashti says no, in verse 14, in 13, and the king said to the sages, experts in protocol, for thus was the king's practice before all the experts in rule and law, and those closest to him were Carchena and Shetar and Admanta, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 ministers of Persia and Media, according to rule what to do with Queen Vashti because she had not obeyed the king's dictate by the eunuchs, which is when Memucan said before the king and the ministers, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but against all the ministers and all the peoples that are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the Queen's Act will go out to all the women to hold their husbands in contempt in their eyes when they will say, King Ahasuerus said to bring Vashti before him, and she did not come. So clearly he's getting high quality advice from these 7, who seem to be more concerned with the impact it'll have on them if they ever get home than it will on the king himself, and are calling for stringent measures to be taken to make an example of Queen Vashti. And he accepts the advice because it's coming from his ministers. When Haman comes to him later, yeah, see, you almost forgot, never know when it's going to sneak in, and wants to kill all the Jews, Ahasuerus doesn't question him. He says, here's my ring, do what you want. After Haman's dead, and Mordecai becomes the prime minister, and Mordecai and Esther come to Ahasuerus and say, we know we can't rescind the edict that was put out there, but can we put out another one that will tell the Jews that they can defend themselves at least? And Ahasuerus takes off the royal ring and hands it to Mordecai, who's now the prime minister, and says, do what you want. So there's a consistency in the seriousness with which Ahasuerus doesn't hold the reins of power. And indeed, even in the story of Esther, winning Ahasuerus' favor and becoming queen, we are told that the only thing Esther did in trying to get the attention and the approval of Ahasuerus was everything that the eunuch that was in charge of the harem, whose name was Haggai, told her to do. So even that eunuch had untold influence over the king by telling Esther what to do. And at the critical moment, one that we've looked at in past years, in chapter 5, after Mordecai says, you got to go to the king and stop the guy. And Esther says, but you're not allowed to appear before the king unless you're invited. And I haven't been invited for a while. And Mordecai says, well, if you don't go, you're going to die because you're Jewish. So if you go and take things into your own hands, at least then maybe if you die, at least you'll know you did something. You know, and it won't just be because you did nothing. Ahasuerus doesn't kill Esther. He asks Esther what she wants. And she invites him to a party with Haman. And they show up, And the first night, she still won't tell Ahasuerus what she wants, and she invites him to come back to a second party the next night. That's when she tells him what's going on. So even there, she's got control over his decision-making. No place in the story does Ahasuerus make a decision by himself. Leave it to the rabbis to notice this. And here's what they have to say about Ahasuerus' character. There were 4 good attributes in that man, is what it says. He went 3 years without a crown and without a throne. He waited 4 years until he found a wife appropriate for him, and he would not do anything without consulting, which they spun into a positive. And Rabbi Pinchas said, and anyone who did him a favor, he would record it. And that is what is written. It was found written that Mordecai had told the king in chapter 6, when the king had that nightmare and awoke and called his advisors and said, something's not right. Read me from the record. What are we missing here? And the question was, what did we do for Mordecai when he saved your life? The answer was nothing. Nothing at all. But yeah, the rabbis found 4 good attributes, and one of them was that he would not do anything without consulting. That is about as generous a statement as I think one could ever possibly hope to make. So that's Ahasuerus. That how we imagine him? I think it is. I think it's a pretty consistent picture between the text itself and what the rabbis bring in. So let's go to the other minor character. We've already gotten the story here. Queen Vashti. She was the queen before Esther replaced her. She held a party for other women in the palace. She refused to go to King Ahasuerus' party, and she is banished in order to teach her and others a lesson. That's pretty much what we know from the text. She's gone by the end of chapter 1. There's a reference to her in passing at the beginning of chapter 2. Queen Vashti is gone from the story almost as quickly as she came on the scene. Not surprisingly, Esther Rabbah has a lot to say on the subject. In classic Midrashic style, the authors pull verses from other parts of the Bible and then explain them in ways that illuminate the story at hand. So, in chapter 3 of the Midrash, on another matter, you have seen, for you behold mischief and spite. The congregation of Israel said before the Holy One, blessed be God, Master of the universe, you saw Nebuchadnezzar the wicked, who came and destroyed the temple, and exiled Israel and shackled them in collars. It is not you are the helper of orphans, but one orphan girl remained from him, Nebuchadnezzar, and you made her an empress in a kingdom that was not hers. And who was that? Vashti. Like Haman, Vashti descends from an enemy of the Jews, but like Esther, she's an orphan God protects, according to the rabbis. They're splitting the difference. So, what else do we know? Where did this come from? Where did they get that she was an orphan? So Rav and Shmuel, who were co-leaders in the rabbinic world together, Rav said everything that the Holy One, blessed be he said about him. Ahasuerus, who would be the king during whose reign the punishment would be completed. That is what is written. I will eliminate from Babylonia name and remnant, child and grandchild, it says in Isaiah 14. Name, that is Nebuchadnezzar. And remnant, that is the evil Merodach. Child, that is Belshazzar. And grandchild, that is Vashti. Clearly, obviously. I know all of us are experts in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 22. And that's how we read it every time. We immediately jump to Vashti. Alternately, name, that is their script, and remnant, that is their language, child and grandchild, that is child and grandchild. Evil Merodach and Belshazzar. And Shmuel said everything that the Holy One, blessed be he said about him. That's what is written. I will place my throne in Elam, and I will eliminate king and princes from there, says the Lord in Jeremiah 49. King, of course, that's Vashti. And princes, these are the 7 princes of Media and Persia. So don't you feel much better now that you've got this clarified from where they got it from? So, just to be clear, in verse 11, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus were told to bring Queen Vashti before the king with the royal crown to show her beauty to the peoples and the ministers, for she was good to look at. And that's the instruction, that was the summons that Queen Vashti refused to follow, according to the word of the kings by the eunuchs. And the king was very furious, and his rage flared up within him. So, why does Vashti say no? According to this, after negotiating unsuccessfully, Vashti tried to explain why it would reflect badly on King Ahasuerus for her to attend his party. Watch the logic here. Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's word by means of the officials, and the king was very angry, and his fury burned within him. She sent and said to him things that upset him. She said to him, if they consider me beautiful, they will set their sights on taking advantage of me and will kill you. If they consider me ugly, you will be demeaned because of me. Why would you want me to show up then? If they like me, it's bad for you. If they don't like me, it's bad for you. This is not your best decision. Don't make me do it. She alluded to what the problem was, but he did not grasp the allusions. What a surprise. Ahasuerus, not the deepest of thinkers, someplace around day 186 of the party. She provoked him, but he was not provoked. She sent and said to him, weren't you the stable boy of my father's house, and you were accustomed to bringing naked prostitutes before you, and now that you have ascended to the throne, you have not abandoned your corruption? It's a pretty heavy charge. She alluded, but he did not grasp the allusions. She provoked him, but he was not provoked. So clearly the rabbis are siding with Vashti. They don't have a problem with her saying no. I suspect they don't have a problem with her saying no because we know we have to get to Queen Esther. Otherwise, nothing happens good to the Jews. But I wonder if maybe there was a little bit of, I don't know, pre-emancipation, pre-Betty Friedan creative thinking amongst the early rabbis that might have made them a little bit sympathetic and able to see this from the woman's point of view. But the text continues, because that's not good enough, with this question. Did Vashti make the right choice in saying no? The rabbis offer their perspectives through a creative reading of a single word, and the word in Hebrew is kedai. In the Megillah, this word literally means like enough, but the presence of the kaf prefix at the beginning, which means like, is an unnecessary addition. An extra letter suggests to the rabbis that there's meaning to be mined or midrash to be made, and here they go. Ready? This day the ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's deed will tell it to all the king's princes, and there will be no end, kedai, of humiliation and wrath. Pretty clear. Pretty clear. Rav and Shmuel say, Rav said, the humiliation is deserving, kedai, of this wrath. Shmuel said the wrath is deserving, kedai, of this humiliation. Chicken or egg. Rabbi Hanina said, as her father dishonored the temple vessels, the humiliation of Vashti is deserving of the wrath that was its result, that was wrathful towards her and killed her. So, just when we thought the rabbis maybe were starting to get a little bit of liberation into them, no. Vashti dies because of her father's sins. Because it goes back to the earlier statement about child and grandchild. Her father was a bad guy to the Jews. She was orphaned. Rav and Shmuel debate which was more reprehensible, humiliating Ahasuerus by not showing up to the party, or the punishment Ahasuerus meted out to Vashti. Rabbi Hanina believes that Vashti was killed, something not mentioned explicitly in the Megillah. By the way, she's never killed. She's just written out. And we actually had this discussion on Sunday with the high school kids, and they came up with an interesting theory that I'll share in a second. and that the punishment was just, but not because Vashti humiliated the king, rather it was due because of the actions of her father Belshazzar. Go figure. We sticking with it so far? So here's what we discussed and decided on Sunday. It's sort of like the choice in the modern world today between the death penalty and life in prison without parole. For some people, life in prison without parole is worse because you got nothing to hope for, nothing to look forward to, and plenty of time to think about what you did. So what if Vashti's punishment was she was sent to the same harem that all the losers in the beauty contest got sent to, because they weren't sent back home. They were just put in the harem that never got called. So they were there to attend the king and to show up for his parties, but not anything having to do with actually having any sense of involvement in the world. Hang on a second, I just got a nasty notice here, which makes me suspect power wasn't on. Ah, that's better. Fixed. So, any other questions about Vashti? Where do you put her? I've always struggled with this. Good, bad, hero, villain, someplace in between.
Or someplace in between. But
Which, remember, by the way, is where the Midrash started. Part of the comparison was to Esther, and part of it was to Haman.
Boo.
Yeah.
His father is never mentioned in the Megillah.
No. Neither is hers. But elsewhere, we know who Belshazzar was. So somewhere the connection is made in the rabbinic mind that father and daughter.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, there may be other ways to look at this. And the Midrash is in overdrive. There's another Midrash that says that Ahasuerus was wrong to expect Vashti to come to the party, that she had agency to think and act as she saw fit, and the Midrash suggests did not need a reason for her refusal. Because Rav Huna said Ahasuerus had a warped sensibility. No, really? The way of the world is that if a man wishes to eat lentils and his wife wishes to eat peas, can he compel her? No. She will eat whatever she wants. That's actually a fairly wise statement from a rabbinic period rabbi. That sounds an awful lot like a rabbinic justification for happy wife, happy life. Just saying. Not necessarily where I would have expected to find it, but there it is. Okay. And a third interpretation in Esther Rabbah describes a conspiracy by Memucan, one of the 7 who got to punish her, and the one who's mentioned specifically in speaking what he thought the punishment should be, to have Vashti deposed from the start, and says that punishing her for refusing to attend the party was just a pretense, which I find intriguing in the current world situation. So what did Memucan see that led him to leap and offer counsel first? One can learn from here that the ignorant leap first. Rabbi Pinchas and Rabbi Chilkiah, in the name of Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan. One said our legal system is like their legal system, and one said our legal system is not like their legal system. The one who said our legal system is like their legal system, it is as we learned in Sanhedrin of the Talmud. In monetary laws and in matters of ritual impurity and purity, one commences from the greatest judge. In capital laws, one commences from the side, meaning the lowest ranking judge. The one who said that our legal system is not like their legal system, what is the significance of Memucan said? It is comparable to the statement of Rabbi Yehuda that appears to be incorrect. Likewise, the statement of Memucan appears to be correct. There is no indication who spoke first, and the reason only Memucan's counsel is mentioned is because his counsel was that which was accepted. So, in case you didn't get it from their own words. Rabbi Yochanan said there are 3 rabbis who explained why Memucan sought to depose Vashti. One said because she would slap him with her slippers on this side and that. Another said because she did not invite his wife to the women's banquet. And the other said because he had a daughter and he sought to marry her to royalty. The one who said because she would slap him with her slippers on this side and that, it is as he said, it is not against the king alone that Vashti has committed this offense. Pretty clear.
It's on. Did I miss something, but wasn't he a eunuch? And you're talking about his,
No, the 7 ministers were not
no,
eunuchs.
okay, but,
Right,
okay.
the first 7 were.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, these guys are okay. And the one who said because she did not invite his wife to the women's banquet, it is as he said, for the queen's deed will get out to all the women, rendering their husbands contemptible in their eyes. That indicates that she was not there. And the one who said because he had a daughter and he sought to marry her to royalty, as he said, and may the king grant her queenship to another who is worthier than she. So they're reading between the lines on all the stuff in the text itself to come up with these answers. So that's Vashti. Where do you want to go next? We got Esther, we got Mordecai, we got Haman. Boo. Exactly. I think Haman's the fun one, right? If nothing else, it forces me to say his name a few more times. So Haman, right? We know Haman's ancestors were the Amalekites. You missed one. Who attacked the Israelites and lived many generations earlier. You remember, we're in the desert. We just got across the water. We haven't gotten to Sinai yet. Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, pick some troops for us, go out and do battle with Amalek. Tomorrow I will station myself on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Then, whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, but whenever he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, supported his hands. Thus his hands remained steady until the sunset, and Joshua overwhelmed the people of Amalek with the sword. Then Adonai said to Moses, inscribe this in a document as a reminder, and read it aloud to Joshua. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. So when we get the genealogy of Haman, we are told he is the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. And elsewhere in the genealogies in the course of the biblical text, the Agagites are descendants, sure enough, of Amalek, who, by the way, we never, even though we were told on multiple occasions to completely wipe him out, ever got around to completely wiping out. Interestingly enough. So, what do we know about Haman? According to the rabbis, we know a lot more than we think we do. Because I know you remember this part of the story of Esther completely. According to the rabbis, he went and sought a barber and did not find one. It's not my story either. What did he do? He went to his house and brought scissors and sat and gave him a haircut. He began to sigh. He, Mordecai, said to him, why are you sighing? He said to him, woe to this man's father. He, Haman, has been removed from being a high official and an overlord and has been made a bath attendant and a barber. Mordecai said to him, that is why I asked you. Do I not know that the father of that man was a bath attendant and a barber in Kafar Karanius, and you have found his barber's tools? Because the rabbis are creative. The rabbis do not have to read from a text that we have. Haman is described as the son of a barber and a bath attendant, two jobs which were not seen as prestigious. The Talmud notes that Haman himself was previously a barber and bath attendant. Haman in other words, does not come from great means in contrast with the king he advises. Moreover, the Midrash describes him as a stranger in the land he resided in, like Esther and Mordecai. Individuals in this position are generally more vulnerable than native-born citizens. Rather than coming from royalty, Esther Rabbah portrays Haman as an outsider who grows up poor but eventually becomes rich, which begs the question, how do you get rich? For which, of course, the rabbis have an answer. Rabbi Pinchas said 2 wealthy men arose in the history of the world, one from Israel and one from the idolaters, and their property was only to their harm. Korach in Israel, who found the treasures of gold and silver that Joseph had concealed, and Haman among the idolaters as he took the treasures of the kings of Judah. When the king saw his wealth and his 10 sons living as princes, he arose and promoted and raised him up. That is what is written. After these matters, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and he raised him up. So, in this one little story, Rabbi Pinchas, tells us his riches were stolen by previous generations, indicts his 10 sons, who we know are going to be killed along with him, even though the 10 sons did nothing wrong in the story, and raises the question of, again, Ahasuerus' judgment in characters. Why did he promote Haman? Because he thought he was rich. He thought he was one of the boys.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And the text notes, just as Haman's rise is thanks to the actions of others, Ahasuerus raised him up, so too is his downfall, according to this midrashic take. When they brought suitable wood before Haman, he prepared it at the entrance to his house and measured himself on it to show his servants how Mordecai should be hanged on it. A divine voice replied to him, "The tree is suitable for you. This tree has been prepared for you since the 6 days of creation." The rabbis there, that is Babylonia, say, where in the Torah is there an allusion to Haman? It is, as it is stated, was it from the tree Hamin Ha'etz in Genesis 3:11, which is expounded to read, Haman Ha'etz. Haman is the tree. So, Haman's building the gallows, and according to the rabbis, the wood that he's using is from the tree that was predestined to be his death, which it turns out it will be. And by the way, if you play it out, what is the sin of the Jews for which the entire people is going to be destroyed?
Not bowing.
Mordecai not bowing. One Jew not bowing. And all the Jews are going to be destroyed. What happens when Haman gets his comeuppance? After Esther accuses him in front of Ahasuerus, and Ahasuerus gets so angry that he steps out into the garden to calm down before he decides what action to take. And when he comes back in, there's Haman begging for mercy from from Esther rather. What does that look like to Ahasuerus? More than it probably should have. At the very least, he's on his knees in front of her begging, which is not an appropriate place for the second in command to be in front of a woman. But in the end, he's bowing down to save his life because he tried to take her life because Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. It's another one of those places where the story takes one piece of information and flips it to get everything to turn out right. So it's an intriguingly deep story. By the way, the rabbis want to know, does Haman recognize? Thank you. That he received a promotion he did not earn or that his end was predetermined? Does he respond to these realities with humility or does he feel deserving and untouchable? Surprise, Esther Rabbah paints a picture of Haman as someone who feels he can control the uncontrollable. So it says in the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, he had cast a pur, that is the lot, before Haman for each day and for each month to the 12th month. That is the month of Adar. In the first month, that is the month of Nisan, it is taught when the wicked Haman sought to eliminate Israel, he said, how can I gain control over them? I will cast lots. The Holy Spirit cried out, over my people they cast lots. In the prophet Joel, it says that. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, wicked one, son of wicked one, your lot is drawn to be hanged. He cast a pur, that is, the lot, upon him the lot fell. Where else do we see lots being cast? Yom Kippur. Jonah's in the bottom of the boat when the storm comes up and the rest of the sailors want to know whose fault it is. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Again, with death in the balance. And they confront Jonah and say, it's on your account that we're here. And Jonah says, yeah, it is. Throw me out of the boat. Haman gets accused by Esther. And what does he do? He forgets his position, he forgets his role, he forgets his manners. He storms, he rages, he begs for forgiveness. To the point when Ahasuerus comes back in and looks at him, he says, take him out and kill him. So again, subtle little stuff that we never stop and think about. Yeah, say it again into the microphone.
That's the decision that Ahasuerus actually made.
All by himself. Yeah. Go figure. The critical one. So you never know what's going to happen. So I could go on. We could all go on. But we're coming up on 8 o'clock. And I do want to keep this internet friendly as well. And there's some other really good stuff out there that came to my attention even in the last couple of days. Some of you, particularly Leon, of those in the room, and those of you who are at home who are regulars at Torah study, have heard me talk for years about one of the things that I find really intriguing about the idea of, I want to get this right, so I want to get to the right place. So bear with me for a second. The difficulty with the book of Esther, among other things, it is the one book that no even remnant portion of was found anywhere in Qumran. And that makes it different from everything else. So I'm doing my homework this week, getting ready for tonight. And I think I've got everything prepared. And as I'm getting ready to turn off the computer yesterday, this article from thetorah.com, which is one of those really good sources for modern commentary on the biblical text that I've become really a fan of, has posted this yesterday. It's a picture of the caves at Qumran. And the blurb above says, this research was hotly disputed for several years, but is finally being accepted by scholars worldwide in time for Purim. Amazing coincidence. And the headline under the picture is newly deciphered Qumran scroll revealed to be Megillah Esther. And I'm sitting there going, I'm going to have to rethink everything as I click on the story and open it up. And here's what it says. Newly deciphered Qumran scroll revealed to be Megillah Esther. The discovery upends decades of research addressing the question of why the book of Esther is missing from Qumran. Nearly half a century ago, archaeologists found a scroll in the Qumran caves that was unreadable as a result of a 2,000-year-old wine spill. Probably should have been my first hint. Due to the extensive staining, the scroll could not be opened or read. Curators stored it away in the archives, hoping that new technology might one day emerge to make the scroll legible. Two such technological breakthroughs, serendipitously discovered just moments apart, that should have been the second hint, have finally made reading this ancient wine-soaked parchment possible. A team of archaeologists and chemists at the Technion in Haifa discovered that the wine could be extracted from the parchment using a highly delicate process known as, quote, a little bit of seltzer. And all of a sudden, I took a deep breath and said, you dummy, you just got had. It is a brilliantly constructed Purim spiel at the level of biblical scholars, right down to the small details. Anything that came out of the cave with all of the fragments that I'm still convinced was the garbage cave and was never intended to have anything found in it, that's why it's all fragments in there, is labeled 4Q whatever, 4 being the cave number at Q Qumran. In this story, now that they can read it, they've labeled the text as 10 Qumran. If you read the first 3 spaces, 10Q. You're welcome. You can't make this stuff up, but they did. Cave 4, where the 10Q Esther scroll was alleged to have been found, is the caption on the picture in the story. Again, should have been a hint, didn't catch it. So we're faced with one of the challenges historically is that Esther is not at Qumran. There is not even a shard of Esther that has been identified as being part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which to me indicates that it probably wasn't considered worthy of salvation when they were fleeing from Jerusalem, which means it's probably one of the last documents that's included in the canon, which probably happened after the scrolls got to Qumran, which is why no copy of Esther was saved. But, and we've talked about this in past years, there's a Persian version of the story of Esther that is mostly the same. It just doesn't talk about the Jews killing everybody at the end and doesn't have the Jewish components. It's a Persian story. And it's clearly a satire and a burlesque for the same reasons that we should suspect that this story is a burlesque, namely that the women are the heroes. And God doesn't appear, and oh, by the way, the male and female team of heroes, Esther and Mordecai, sounds an awful lot like Ishtar and Marduk. Sounds a lot more like Ishtar and Marduk than Ahasuerus sounds like Xerxes, at the very least. So there's a lot of reasons to think that this was never intended to be a sacred story. It was not written to be included in the sacred canon. So then why did the rabbis do it? Because they needed to get rid of all of the stuff that was left over from the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees. After 135, after the Bar Kokhba rebellion was over, when they were afraid the Romans would see anything that smacked of praising somebody who was a warrior or a war hero as being a good guy, that would make the Romans say, oh, they're planning another rebellion against us, let's wipe them out for good. That and the fact that their formation history probably made them not like the Hasmoneans and the Maccabees anyway. So the rabbis were not in a hurry to give credit to anything that the Hasmoneans did. Hanukkah wasn't the only holiday the Hasmoneans put on the calendar. Turns out on the 13th day of Adar on the Hasmonean calendar, there was a feast day called the Feast of Niconor. It was the day the Hasmoneans defeated the enemy general Niconor, one of the great victories of the campaign after the story of Hanukkah. You know, when they went back to fighting amongst themselves anyway. That went on for another 20 years. So the rabbis need to get this day celebrating a victory in battle off the calendar. What better way than to make it the day before Purim and declare that's the fast of Esther that she asked of Mordecai? Even though the 3 days of fasting she asked from Mordecai when he said, go talk to Ahasuerus, were nowhere near the month of Adar. So they were solving a problem and they were willing to accept smaller problems in the text to help them solve their big problem. And that's how it gets in, I think. I really do. It makes a lot of sense logically. I wish there was more, archaeology and text history to back it up. But it certainly wasn't a wine stain on a 2,000-year-old shard from cave number 4 at Qumran. Thank you very much, yeah. So that, my friends, is Purim for another year. Just remember, somehow this becomes a kid's holiday. Somehow this becomes a frivolous holiday. It's connected calendrically to both Mardi Gras and to St. Patrick's Day, which, by the way, it shares a common date with tomorrow, once again this year. Back in the 80s, that combination came up, and if you haven't already seen it, I posted it last night. Saturday Night Live, on their cold open that week, noted in their own unique way the overlap between Purim and St. Patrick's Day in one of the unintentionally funnier cold openings that they did back in the day, including a cameo by Ed Koch, who was still the mayor at the time. So, the calendar is obvious. Tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day and Purim. They come at the same time. The connection to Mardi Gras is that Mardi Gras is always the day before Ash Wednesday, which marks the 40 days of Lent leading up to Easter. Even in a leap year like this one on the Jewish calendar, Purim is in the last month of the year. It's not in Adar 1 in a leap year, it's in Adar 2. So that way it's always 30 days before Passover. And it's the 30 days around the spring equinox, the start of the new agricultural year. So the old year ends with a salvational victory that becomes a joyous holiday. And 30 days later, we celebrate our emergence from slavery all over again. So it's like the whole year is this journey like the Seder is, from slavery to redemption. So they have to be linked on the calendar. It's just the linkage is this way in this case. It's not the 30 days, it's the other 324 or 354 that link it together. So there's that. There's the fact that it looks like a backwards Halloween. We tell our children to dress up and go door to door and give out food instead of trying to extort it from our neighbors by yelling trick or treat, which if you think about it is actually a threat, or originally was supposed to be. Give me a treat or I'm going to do a trick. This is backwards from that. This is a little bit more manageable. We're doing things for our neighbors that are good to celebrate the holiday. Because once again, someone wanted us dead. We survived. Let's eat. And finally for tonight, in Hebrew, Hamantashen. You know this one, Sharon? Oznei Haman. Haman's ears. Haman's ears. Oznei Haman. I was doing it in one of the songs with the kids on Sunday for celebrating Purim, and the kids looked at me and said, "We're eating Haman's ears? Ew." Which was a whole different slant on the story than I had ever considered before, but at least in Hebrew, that's what we're eating. Yeah, I was taught the hat. It's a and I was also taught that originally linguistically that the fact that it's Hamantashen had nothing to do with Haman. Right. Just want to make sure you were still there one last time. And last but not least, the question that came up on Sunday morning during religious school. Why are there no songs about Esther? And Felicia actually gave me an interesting answer. We're pretty sure there is. We can't imagine that Debbie Friedman wrote a song for Vashti and didn't write one for Esther. But it's never one that's gotten any traction. So it's not a good one. Why are there no songs taught about Esther for Purim if she's the hero? So I've got my work cut out for me. We need an Esther song for Purim. So friends, it has been a pleasure here and at home. A little more talking on my part than I intended, but we'll work out those kinks on the technology side and get people more interactive the next time. If you're wondering about my costume, Friday night when I put the robe on, I was Crusader Rabbah, which went over like a lead balloon and made me start to think that maybe the old cartoon Crusader Rabbit was only a New York thing. You knew it because you're from New York. I knew it because I'm from New York. Do you? So, yeah. So, but apparently it's a Christological cartoon, Crusader Rabbit. It was in that same category back in the day with Davy and Goliath. It was on Sunday morning, not Saturday morning in New York, which should have been the hint. But then I took off the robe and I picked up the guitar because I was leading the services and doing the music. And then with the guitar on, I became Crusader Cantor. On Sunday, I was walking around as the king, same outfit, with the guitar, and somebody looked at me and said, "The king with the guitar? That is the worst Elvis costume I have ever seen." And on that note, I will say, Chag Purim Sameach. Have a great time. Question, Leon, where you're waving. I'm gonna clear my over screen for a second just to make sure there's nothing else coming from home. Any final comments from those gathered with us? This would be a good time to open up and just jump in. Looks like we lost some folks along the way, Michael. A couple of times. In that case, I thank you all for tuning in at home, and I will declare this interactive session to have been as qualified a success as we could have on Purim, and wish you all a Chag Purim Sameach at home, and we'll see everybody Friday night for services in the less interactive but more traditional hybrid style. Chag Sameach, everybody.